Jung wanted to tell you why, because once you understand this, you will stop wasting your effort on the one path that cannot lead anywhere, and you will be free to take the one that can. Consider the most famous instance of imitation in the Western world, the imitation of the holy life. A man can imitate that life down to the smallest detail. He can imitate it so completely that the wounds of the cross appear on his own body, the marks of the deepest suffering, the stigmata. And he can do all of that without coming anywhere near the ideal or its meaning. Read that again slowly. A person can suffer the literal wounds of the model and still not touch the thing the model was pointing at. Because copying is not becoming. It is not a question of an imitation that leaves a man unchanged and turns him into a mere artifact, a finished object that resembles the original from the outside. It is a question of realizing the ideal on your own account in your own individual life. Do you feel the size of that distinction? On one side you have a man who has made himself into a perfect copy and stayed empty inside. On the other you have a man who has taken the same ideal and let it do its work in his actual life, with his actual wounds, in his actual circumstances, and has been changed by it. The first man worships. The second man becomes. And only the second has gone anywhere. Understand what the second road actually looks like, so you do not imagine it as something neat. Jung believed the way to wholeness is not the straight, clean ascent you were sold. It is the longest road. It is snake-like, not straight. A path that winds and doubles back, that joins the opposites in you instead of choosing one and exiling the other. Its turns are not without their terrors. And this is exactly why the imitation is so attractive by comparison. The imitation gives you a straight line and a clear target. Copy the figure, close the gap, be done. The becoming gives you a crooked path through your own difficult material with no promise of the hour you will arrive. Most people choose the straight imitation precisely because the crooked becoming asks more than they think they can give. But only the crooked road goes anywhere, because only it takes the whole of you along. Here is how the trap is built, so you can recognize it in yourself. When the ideal is placed entirely outside you, as an external object to be admired, then something terrible happens to your own darkness as well. If the supreme value is outside, then your sins are also outside. You can quite literally cast your faults onto the figure and walk away lightened, evading the deepest responsibility you have, which is the responsibility for your own becoming. This is the opposite of what the tradition actually intended, but it is what the tradition becomes when it hardens into pure external worship. The supreme value stands out there, the supreme negation stands out there, and the soul in the middle is left void, with its highest and its lowest both missing. This was never the intention. The demand to follow the ideal, to seek to become like it, ought by its own logic to develop and raise the person who follows it. That was the whole purpose of holding up a model at all. But the moment the model is turned into an external object of worship, that veneration of the object is exactly what stops it from reaching down into the depths and giving the soul a wholeness to match it. So the very act of worshipping the ideal too purely from the outside defeats the ideal. The figure stands there admired, while the man who admires it stays in fragments, because all his reverence flows toward the object, and none of it sinks into the room where he actually lives. So the imitator can feel righteous and remain hollow. He can perform the whole drama of devotion and never let it descend into his own depths. The divine mediator stands outside him as an image, and he stays in pieces, untouched at the core, because the worship of the object is the very thing that prevents the image from reaching down into the soul and giving the soul a wholeness that would actually match the ideal. Now, Jung had to be fair, because he was not telling you that all this effort is worthless. That would be a lie, and it would also be cruel. Even a mistaken imitation can carry within it a tremendous moral effort. It can hold all the merit of a total surrender to something a person holds higher than himself, even when the real goal is never reached, even when the value stays out there as an external thing. And here is the part that gave him hope for the man on the wrong path. By the sheer force of that total effort, a person may even catch a fleeting glimpse of his ownness and feel for a moment the grace that always comes with that glimpse. So the striving was never nothing. The energy was real. It was simply aimed at a copy instead of at a becoming. There is a reason the real road is taken so rarely, and Jung would not hide it from you. To genuinely let the ideal work in your own life is to take on a suffering that most people cannot bear, the suffering of holding your opposites open instead of resolving them by amputation. So in practice, the example is followed either with great reservation or not at all. Even the institutions that teach it have always found themselves quietly forced to lighten the load, to tone the sharp conflict down to something a person can survive day to day. He did not blame them for that. A constant, unbearable inner war is not a life. But you should at least be honest about what has happened. The full thing was softened into a manageable imitation, and then the manageable imitation was mistaken for the full thing. The performance became the substitute for the transformation, and almost no one noticed the exchange. What Jung was asking you to do is to take all of that genuine effort and turn it inward toward the realization of the ideal in your own life, rather than toward the performance of a flawless imitation for an audience that includes yourself. If you have ever exhausted yourself trying to be good and felt no closer at the end than at the beginning, take one moment now and subscribe, because what comes next is the part nobody told you, the part that turns all that wasted striving into the real thing. Let him name the deepest reason the pure imitation fails. It treats wholeness as something you assemble by correction, by removing one fault after another until the figure is clean. But that is not how a human being becomes whole. Wholeness is not the achievement of a flawless surface. It is the bringing together of the whole man, the part you are proud of and the part you would rather cast onto the figure outside you and forget. The imitator is forever trying to scrape away the lower half of himself to look more like the model, and the lower half does not vanish. It goes underground. It becomes your fate. The very thing you refuse to integrate comes back to rule you from the dark, precisely because you spent all your effort pretending it was not yours. This is why Jung told those who work with the soul that the question is never only what a person does, but how he does it, and above all, who is doing it. The right deed in the hands of the wrong man works out badly in the end, and no one who sees clearly is fooled by it. The imitator is forever polishing the deed, the visible act, the correct performance, and leaving the doer underneath unchanged. But it is the doer that decides the value of the deed. You can perform every right action and remain the wrong man, the fragment, the one who has cast his dark half onto the figure and refused to know it. Becoming is the slow work on the doer, not the endless correction of the deeds. It is the reason two people can do the very same good thing and only one of them is changed by it. This is why Jung says, stop imitating and start becoming. To become is to accept the whole material of your own life, including the difficult and the unflattering, as the actual substance the ideal has to work on. There is no clean shortcut around this. The right way to wholeness is made up of fateful detours and wrong turnings. It is not a straight road. It is a path that twists and doubles back, a path that unites the opposites in you rather than amputating the half you dislike. And its turns are not without their terrors, because the wholeness we talk about so easily is the very thing we most fear. It asks the whole of a person. The imitation asks only the surface. Do not let this frighten you into paralysis, though. The whole of a person is not delivered in a single heroic act. It is grown, slowly, the way anything alive is grown. You do not become whole by one tremendous decision to face everything at once. That kind of forcing is just the imitation again, wearing the costume of courage. You become whole by the patient, ordinary work of meeting what your own life brings you, one piece at a time, and refusing to exile the pieces you dislike. The crooked road is long precisely because it is alive, and living things take the time they take. Jung wanted to guard you against two errors here, because people fall into both. The first error is to hear all this and conclude that you should throw away every model every teacher, every form, and trust nothing but your own impulse. That is not what he said. The ideal is not the problem. The figure you look up to is not the problem. The problem is making it only an object out there, worshipped at a distance, while the inner correspondence stays asleep. Think of it like the difference between standing before a fire to admire its light and letting the fire into the cold rooms of the house. The figure you look up to is the fire. Admiring it from across the room, naming it, praising its brightness, will not warm you. The warmth comes only when you carry it inward and let it reach the places in you that have never been touched. The imitator spends his life describing the fire in perfect detail and shivering. The one who becomes lets it in and is changed by the heat, even though the heat is harder to bear than the admiration ever was. Both are looking at the same fire, only one of them stops being cold. You can keep the figure and let it descend. You can honor the model and still do the inner work it was always meant to provoke. The two are not enemies. What changes is where you place the center of the effort, outside in performance or inside in transformation. The second error is the harsher one, and it wounds sincere people. It is to turn becoming into a new and crueler form of self-correction, where you stand over your own soul like a harsh inspector hunting for crimes to punish. That is just the old imitation wearing a new mask. Becoming is not self-punishment. You do not integrate your darkness by condemning it. Condemnation does not liberate. It oppresses. The part of you that you have been trying to scrape away does not need a sentence. It needs to be understood and brought back into the whole. You watch the silent happenings in your own soul with patience, not with a whip. The most and the best happens when it is not forced and regulated from outside and above. And here is the part that the imitator finds hardest of all, because it overturns the whole logic of self-correction. To become whole, you have to take the part of the one in you that you are trying to scrape away. You have to love the sinner who is yourself. Jun knew this sounds like weakness, and it is the opposite. To love the sinner who is oneself is not to excuse anything or to make peace with harm. It is to stop treating your own darkness as an enemy to be destroyed and to start treating it as a part of you to be understood and brought home. Love makes a man better. Hate makes him worse. And this holds even when the man in question is yourself. The imitator hates his lower half, and so it grows. The one who becomes turns toward it without condemnation, and only then does it begin to change. Jung would rather a person were whole than that he were merely good, because the merely good man has usually achieved his goodness by exiling half of himself, and that exiled half is waiting in the dark to take its revenge. So set down the measuring rod for a moment. You have spent enough of your life calculating the distance between yourself and the perfect figure and calling that distance your guilt. That calculation is the imitation. It keeps you facing the object and never facing yourself. The becoming begins the moment you turn from the copy to the life, from the performance to the substance, and let the ideal do its slow and fateful work in the one place it can actually change you, which is the whole of who you already are, dark and light together. You will not finish this in a day. Jung believed wholeness is not something you manufacture by art or by cunning. You can only grow into it and endure whatever its coming brings. But that is exactly the difference between the two roads. The imitator builds a perfect statue of himself and stands beside it, empty. The one who becomes grows a living thing, slowly with its dark roots and its reaching branches, and is changed by his own growth. In the comments, mark this turn for him and for whoever needs it after you. Write 3 words, become, not copy, and come with him to the next one, because there is a reason this becoming is so rare, a reason most people will do almost anything to avoid it. They will travel the whole earth, learn strange disciplines, repeat foreign words, do anything at all rather than face the one thing that could change them. Why we run from our own souls is where we go next.